Yesterday I published a video defending the side of the Imperial Legion within Skyrim's Civil War. Today I flip things around as I'll be defending the Stormcloaks. As with the previous video, I've come up with two main segments which you honestly have to possess quite a high IQ to understand. Stormcloaks good and Imperials bad. Let's start with the former of the two. Arguably the most important thing that the Stormcloaks fight for is the right to worship Talos, the native god of Skyrim. The Empire, through ruling of the Thalmor, banned the worship of Talos throughout all of their lands, and the revoking of this law is something that Ulfric Stormcloak has fought for before his rebellion even took place. Before fighting against the Empire, he had worked alongside them, but was betrayed.
We promised a group of Nord militia free worship in exchange for their help retaking the hold. Then the elves found out about it. We were forced to arrest all of them. Ulfric Stormcloak, their leader, used the whole thing as proof that the Empire had abandoned Skyrim. The rebels called it the Markarth Incident. It was the founding day for the Stormcloaks, and where this war really started.
Ulfric had been honourable in his actions, faithfully serving the Empire while still fighting for the religious freedom of his people. But the Empire turned its back on their word the second it was questioned, arresting Ulfric and throwing him in prison before he became Jarl of Windhelm.
My father, the Great Bear of Eastmarch, died during my imprisonment after the Markarth incident. I, his only son, forced to deliver his eulogy via letter I had smuggled out of prison. Such is the love of Titus meat for his subjects. When finally set free, I returned to Windhelm and was greeted by a city in mourning, at one with my own grief and anger, clamoring in angry voices, calling out for justice, for war. They sat me on the throne.
Even in his position of power, he couldn't allow those under his rule to worship who they wished without the Empire branding him a criminal. And so the Stormcloak rebellion rages across Skyrim, as many Nords fight for the right to openly worship the god they believe in. But that's not the only thing that the Stormcloaks are fighting for. They also fight so that the people of Skyrim can rule themselves.
I fight for my people, impoverished to pay the debts of an empire too weak to rule them, yet brands them criminals for wanting to rule themselves. I fight so that all the fighting I've already done hasn't been for nothing. I fight because I must.
To Ulfric and many other Nords, the Empire is weak, and it has no right to enforce laws upon them. Why should it bow down to both Cyrodiil and the Aldmeri Dominion, when they could instead choose for themselves what the law of the land will be? And Ulfric himself believes that an independent Skyrim will be what leads the charge against the Thalmor.
There will be peace for a time, during which we must rebuild Skyrim into the land it once was. Strong, self-reliant, the center of mankind. Because getting rid of the Empire was only half the problem. Soon the elves will again seek to rule the world. We must ready ourselves to fight them. For it will be Skyrim that shall lead Tamriel in those dark days, when the fate of the world is finally determined.
After all, while the Empire signed the White Gold Treaty after the Imperial City was crushed, those in Hammerfell kept the fight against the Aldmeri Dominion going for 5 more years, before the Second Treaty of Stros M'Kai was signed. It's clear that the other parts of Tamriel that are separate from the Empire wish to oppose the Thalmor, so an independent Skyrim may perhaps have a better chance of uniting everyone than the Empire would. These are really the two big arguments in favour of the Stormcloaks being the good guys. However, I also wish to cover the main negative point I had against them in yesterday's video: racism. While I'm not going back on anything I said yesterday, I do think there's some more nuance to the perceived discrimination that the Stormcloaks are accused of. The first point is in regards to how the Dark Elves are treated. While it's true that they reside within the Grey Quarter in Windhelm, it's also worth noting that these are refugees from Red Mountain.
When the Red Mountain burned, you could scarcely breathe in Morrowind, so we came west. Windhelm was the first city on that road, and here we are.
They're seeking refuge, and the city of Windhelm has provided that. It may not be in the best place in the city, but for nearly 200 years now, the Dunmer have been granted a place within its walls. 200 years could be as little as a fifth of a lifetime for an elf, but for the Nords who call Windhelm their home, it's more than 2 long-lived lifetimes, and for many, it may be the case that they feel the Dunmer have overstayed their welcome and want them to find a new home to settle. And as for Ulfric and the Stormcloaks, well, they are more than willing to welcome a Dark Elf into the Stormcloaks, as long as they believe in the cause.
Why does an elf want to fight for Skyrim? You mistake me. I'm not saying no, just wondering about your intentions. We're not looking for sellswords. The Stormcloaks need dedicated men and women who are devoted to the cause and willing to die for it.
While many citizens of Skyrim will claim that the Stormcloaks only respect Nords, you as the player don't really come across them doing anything blatantly discriminatory to residents of the land. They have plenty bad to say about elves, in regard to the Thalmor, who it's worth mentioning are basically Elder Scrolls Nazis. And the Stormcloaks do praise the Nords of Skyrim a lot, but this could be viewed more along the lines of patriotism than some form of Nordic superiority. None of these points completely dismantle the point that Ulfric could very well be racist, but they're worth considering, and it's not like he's the only one saying some questionable things. While the Stormcloaks are loudly criticised for their treatment of anyone who's not a Nord, you can also level a similar critique when playing through the Imperial side.
Without us to keep order, the provinces would fall into barbarism and lawlessness.
My men are fearless. It's the Imperial milk drinkers I'm worried about.
Talk to enough people in Skyrim and you'll learn that stereotypes reign strong, no matter which side you're on. Many Nords believe the Southern Imperials to be soft and use the term milk drinker as a casual insult, while plenty of Imperials in turn think their northern neighbours are barbarians, who would become total savages without the Empire enforcing law and order in their lands. As with all generalised statements, these can be easily rebutted, but the fact they're voiced aloud by people in positions of power are indicative of the biases that permeate throughout all of Tamriel. But maybe that's too minor of a critique against the Empire. Let's instead go to a more major point against them, the fact they serve the Thalmor. As I've already stated more than enough times, the Empire has helped enforce the ban on Talos worship, as dictated by the Aldmeri Dominion. If they're willing to restrict religious freedoms, we don't know what other demands the Empire would be willing to enforce, as is screamed by everyone's favourite nutjob.
Today, they take away your faith. But what of tomorrow? What then? Do the elves take your homes? Your businesses? Your children? Your very lives?
The slippery slope argument is always one to view with a skeptical eye, but that doesn't mean you should ignore it. Maybe this is as far as the Empire will go with submitting to the Thalmor, agreeing to stop the worship of Talos but nothing more. Or maybe the fear of complete Altmer rule will pressure them into doing more for the Dominion. We don't know where the Empire will draw the line, and that fear is a common reason why many would rather go against them now, before things risk getting worse. All this is very much opinions and emotions, a whole lot of what-ifs and scaremongering. What we'll end this section on are two hard and fast bits of significant evidence that the Legion has a dark side, and both of these come at the very start of the game. The first is to do with Helgen having a torture chamber alongside its jail cells. Yeah, the Imperials torture people. Don't see the Stormcloaks doing that, just the Empire and the Thalmor. Honestly, I'll feel kind of stupid if I spend too much time covering this point. Torture is bad, it doesn't work, and it's a clear negative point against the Legion. I really don't need to expand further. The other clear negative of the Empire you see at the start of the game is when they try and cut your head off. Yeah, before you ever get control of your character, the Legion decides that you need to be beheaded. I mean, you were near some Stormcloaks, so clearly you're guilty of something. The player character is in rags. It's made clear that you weren't a part of the Stormcloaks, and there's no official crime listed. You aren't even on the same list as the Horse Thief. The Legion has no evidence that you've done a single thing wrong. But rather than admit a mistake and let you go, they make it so you're the second person to reach the chopping block. Sure, once the execution falls through, they don't come after you further, but that doesn't change the fact that the ruling party of Skyrim have zero real issue with killing random people for no good reason. And for many players, this is all that matters. They tried to kill us, therefore they're the bad guys. And there we have it. I hope you enjoyed this pair of videos, and if you haven't already, do make sure to check out yesterday's video where I defended the Legion's side of things. There are some really good arguments that can be made for either side, and it's clear to me that neither side is good or bad. Skyrim Civil War is a great example of a questline where neither choice is right, but your actions will greatly change the path of Tamriel for years to come. Just a shame the actual quests aren't all that fun.